record button. So I am now recording this session, and everybody at the end will get I'll send out the recording of the webinar. We will also post it on our website, and any resources that Shannon shares, I will send out as well. And so you're welcome to share this with any colleagues who would also be interested in this information. So welcome specifically to the webinar, Closing the Digital Divide, 5 Digital Literacy Strategies to Help Adult Learners. Our presenter today is Shannon Sims, as you can see on the slide, from Mockingbird Education. And Shannon joined Mockingbird in 2012. She has over 10 years direct experience teaching vulnerable learners in adult basic skills and 19 years as a professional development provider. In her role with Mockingbird, Shannon provides professional development, consulting, implementation support, evaluation, research, and curriculum development for education programs that serve low socioeconomic status and marginalized learners. We're very excited to have her and all of Mockingbird's expertise with us today. And so at this time, I'm going to turn the screen over to Shannon to take control. And so everyone knows I will be monitoring the chat, and you are welcome at any point to type questions in there, and I will gently at a good point interrupt Shannon to say that there are questions. But you also are welcome to unmute and ask a question yourself through it. We have found that it is best to take questions as we go along, have it be as interactive as possible. So without further ado, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and otherwise, Shannon, you can take it away. Thank you.
Awesome, great. So is my screen coming through like it should? Excellent.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We also very much appreciate the opportunity to connect with all of you through our partnership with Digital Promise. We entered into a partnership with DP a little over a year ago, and this has really been a great avenue for us to really start to explore how does this technology trend that's happening in education impact our learners and adult learners specifically. So we are happy to share with you some strategies for that. Before we do that, let's dig in. I'll start off by sharing a little bit about who Mockingbird is and the work that we do. Then we'll look a little bit at what is, when we say digital literacy, what do we mean when we say that? After we talk about digital literacy and we define that, we'll talk about something called infusion and what that really means and how do we infuse any strategy into what it is that we're doing with our learners. And then finally, we'll look closely at 5 different key strategies that research shows us that adult learners or learners who are navigating an adult world, what are those 5 strategies they need to really become fluent in using digital literacy or technology in their daily lives, not just to learn on a platform where they sit and work through some kind of a module, but to use and infuse digital literacy and technology in their everyday life. So are you ready? Let's dig in. First of all, this is me. My name is Shannon Sims. Suzanne already shared a lot of information about me. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction here at Mockingbird Education. And let's share a little bit about what our day is. So I just talked a little bit about the agenda. We'll define digital literacy. We'll talk about why it's important for our learners and why we should care about that as educators. And then we'll look at practical solutions for both instructors and for programs in general. First, let's talk a little bit about Mockingbird Education. Let's see, Mockingbird Education, we call ourselves instructional designers, which means this. We design instructional experiences that help promote success for vulnerable learning populations. So that could be for younger learners, that could be for older learners, for ABE programs. I'll show you a bit more about who our programs are. But we've been doing this work for over 16 years. We do this work domestically, both domestically and internationally. So you'll find us all over the US in different places, but we also do work in Central America. I just got back last week from doing some work in Tanzania, in Africa. So you'll find us all over the globe doing this kind of work. These are some of our partners. You'll notice Digital Promise is up there. Also GED testing services. Mockingbird is one of 3 professional development providers who is endorsed to train educators for all those changes that happened in 2014. And this is really what unites our learners. This is what unites our programs. This is our learner is what unites the work that we do. We work with this learner. Our learners come from backgrounds of low socioeconomic status. They have poverty. They have maybe issues with academic failure. They have second language barriers. All of these concerns are really what unite our programs. If a lot of times, I bet you if you're looking on the screen, you'll relate to serving a learner population that is struggling with a lot of these barriers. These barriers can be very challenging because this learner population that we're looking at right here on the screen is not our learner, right? Our learners don't necessarily show up with this type of enthusiasm every day when they come to school. Our learners are a little more resistant, right? We have to coax them along. Come on, math is good for you. Technology is good for you. This is going to help you, right? We're doing that kind of work all the time. And our learners also really, having a lot of academic failure or some of the barriers that they've been dealing with, they've really learned how to blend in. They know how to make, like if they struggle with reading, they know how to appear that they have more reading skills than they actually do. And they do that as a representation of survival, right? So it's a very different experience in that very first picture we saw here, right? Where our learners are struggling with not just academic needs, but also survival needs. This learner has instability. Maybe they come to our program because they know that they're supposed to be there every day, but they don't have a place to go to at the end of the day, or they're struggling with just basic needs and surviving. In addition to that, our learners often don't know what it means to integrate skills like technology into our program, and so we're in this constant competition with that in our work. Or our learners are coming to us because maybe a criminal justice program has said, hey, if you don't go to this program, our learners, you can end up going into jail instead. So we have a lot of things that we don't always talk about as people who serve vulnerable learning populations. They're just sort of part of our normal. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that this difference, this thing that makes us unique, is really what combines and unites us and unifies us as a program. So this is the world in which we teach. I know you recognize that world. This world is also really, really, really dangerous because, as we start to say, hey, this is the identity of our program, this is who we serve, our learners really take on this identity too. I've heard my own experience with learners. They say, oh, well, I'm at risk. I can't do it because I'm at risk. And they start to own this identity. And our goal at Mockingbird is really to shift from this type of identity, from helping a learner move beyond the fact that they have these barriers and start to identify more like this. We know that these things are about them too. These are the things that also describe them. They have life experiences, they're resilient, they're open, they're flexible, all these beautiful things. So this is who we serve, and this is what we hope to help our learner identify with. People need a powerful why if they're going to endure the difficulty of the how. This is really sort of the backbone of everything that Mockingbird does with learners and vulnerable learners and the programs that serve them, is we really try to help our programs understand and our learners understand, why is it that we're doing what we're doing? Because if we don't buy into the why, the work that it's going to take us to get through the process is going to be too hard, and we'll quit and we'll give up. So let's first talk about the how, because that how is really, really hard. It's not a magic bullet. It's not a quick solution. Oftentimes we're talking about moving a learner's identity from one of being at risk or one of overcoming all of these barriers to really transforming them to have a new relationship with their own thoughts, their own feelings, and their own actions, to build an identity of a successful learner, or of a person who's worthy of contributing to society, or worthy of taking something from society, right? So this is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's very, very difficult, and it takes time. And so that's the work that Mockingbird's trying to do, is how do we help you build this relationship with your own thoughts, your feelings, and your actions as a learner to build a positive learner identity over time. And why is that important? This is why. For Mockingbird, if we were to take one image and put it down together, we work in a system that sets a lot of low socioeconomic students up to enter prison and not school. And so we want to use education as a vehicle to move learners more towards that university and away from prison. And the reason why the work we do is so important is because research tells us that what educators know and what they can do is the most important influence on what students actually learn. So to put that really simply, if we have skilled educators, we're going to have better learner results. the quality of our educator more heavily influences a learner performance than their race, their class, where the school is, the type of school that they have. And here's what's super empowering for me is that if we had two learners, one who came from an advantaged background and one that came from a disadvantaged background, if the disadvantaged learner has access to a high-skilled educator, they're going to benefit exponentially compared to one who came from an advantaged background. So the more we can infuse ourselves with as many skills as possible to best serve this population, we're going to get a return on that investment over and over and over again. So we've already talked about our agenda. That's a little bit about who Mockingbird is, what we do, the work that we do, and why we do our work. If you want more information about Mockingbird, I'll give you my contact information at the end of this, but let's dig into our content. Let's start here. I would love it. Let's use our chat box down here. Answer this question, and I think Susan can help us with that, but if you were to define digital literacy, let's just create a definition for it. What do we mean when we say that? Let's use our chat box really quickly. If you would please just participate, add in a few definitions. What is digital literacy?
Great, and Shannon, I'll read them as they come.
Awesome.
We have online classes, GED, etc.
Okay.
The ability to use computers, using technology to enhance learning, digital citizenship.
Okay.
A bunch just came through right away.
Yeah.
The ability to successfully use the digital tools available, use technology to obtain information, full digital citizens and not visitors not familiar with tech, online resources, smartphones, tablets, technology solves problems, ability to navigate. A lot of this is about being empowered users who can use these tools for understanding, competency, knowledge, problem solving, facilitating learning.
Yeah, great. These are really helpful. This is so fascinating to me because whenever I ask this question to educators, I get a very similar response. And I think it really speaks to some of the issues that we have in adult education in general, is that we don't really have clear definitions for everything. We have these words, right? These tag words, digital literacy. We talk about, oh, people have to be digitally literate. And we all sort of have an idea of what we think that means. But in terms of adult education, because of the way that our programs are set up and because of the way that we are all just kind of trying to get everybody skilled up to do the next thing, we lack these common labels and common phrases that we really know what they mean. It's really interesting. So all of those things, they did talk about empowered users, but the nuances of them were very, very different. Here were some of the ones that I had found when I had gone through and just tried to do a quick search. Somebody was saying one definition was the ability to use digital technology, communication tools, or networks to locate, evaluate, use, and create information. Then somebody else added, oh, we have to be able to do that in multiple formats and use ranges of sources, but it's got to be on computers. Or then it was like, oh no, it's actually all digital media and all this knowledge from any digital environment. And it really came down to, there were two sort of platforms that I saw over and over again. One either looked at it from a technological determinism, so it was really, let's use technology as a tool that helps us keep up with whatever's coming down or whatever technology is coming down the pipeline. Or there was this lens of, oh, let's look at it from a social perspective, social determinism. How does our use of technology help us stay politically or economically or socially, culturally valid? And it was a lot. It's varied. At the end of the day, we really talk about what digital literacy is. Our own interpretations of that are varied, they're complicated, and they're widely disputed across our field in general. So for the sake of our conversation today, I'd like to give us a shared definition of digital literacy, just so that way everyone who's on the webinar can understand Mockingbird's framework and what we're trying to use these strategies to address when we say digital literacy. So this is what Mockingbird is going to define digital literacy as for today: a person's ability to use digital technology, communication tools, or networks to locate, evaluate, use, and create information. So that could be a wealth of medium. It could be on a computer, it could be on a screen, it could be on a phone. And we're not just going to be absorbing information. We will use those tools to find information, to think about, evaluate, analyze, to use information, and then also to be a producer of or someone who creates information. That's what we mean when we say digital literacy. And let's think about where this really comes from, because it's a huge shift in our market. I know K-12 has really been digging into digital literacy for a long time, but it's really come to adult education through this thing called globalization. We've already had some impact and we've already felt sort of the shift of globalization when we had those changes in Common Core and GED 2014 come down the pipeline, where we realized, wow, entry-level employment has changed. Learners are now responsible for, or workers are now responsible for, understanding abstract concepts and not just procedures. I have to understand how the bigger picture fits together. I have to be able to think systemically. I have to be able to use technology to manipulate symbols and understand what those things represent. I have to be able to acquire knowledge, but not just acquire knowledge. I have to be able to transfer that along multiple contexts. I have to be able to work in a team, and maybe that team isn't even in the same room anymore. I have to be able to do that virtually. And now there's this mental and physical blur between the work that we do. There used to be a lot of entry-level jobs where you could go build something, or you could go do manual labor, and that was all we needed you to do. But because of technology, an employer can pay for that to be automated, and now we're going to use human capacity or human potential to be thinking, right? So this globalization has really put some urgency in our field to help people not just be able to think in these ways and have these skills, but to be able to do these skills via technology and via being digitally literate. So here's what we know. Entry-level employment has changed. This is a really funny cartoon. It says, yes, we do accept resumes online, but there's more to it than just giving me your computer with your resume on it. I think that's one of the things that our learners they're finishing our programs and they're coming up against. Wow, I have the skills to complete this job, but I can't even apply for it because I don't know how to apply for a job online, right? Entry-level employment has changed. The jobs that we literally are doing are changing, but also the way we access and how we get those jobs are changing by way of interview, by way of how we access those pathways to employment. In addition to that, how we find information in our daily lives has changed. So if you think about the last time I was at dinner last night with my family, and my oldest son had said, you know, I wonder about what happens. I can't remember what it was, but it was some weird thing that he had been wondering. We were like, oh, let's just find out. We pulled out our phones and we Googled it right then. We're in this norm where we know how to find information that we need on a daily basis. When our learners don't have that skill set, they lag behind. And so it's more about this, the structure of this webinar is more about helping learners use technology in their daily lives to find out how do you give, you know, medicine to your children, or looking things up on a daily basis, or using technology in an everyday capacity, so that way it's going to really enrich and serve your life. This was interesting research. Today's students must do more than memorize facts. Students must understand how to use digital tools to gather facts, to interpret, to analyze, create meaning, even create new meaning from information they gather. So not just look and take things for face value, but use that information to make this whole new idea. Becoming truly literate means embracing a new framework of learning that layers core content into a world rich in digital and media literacies that will help students become future-ready graduates in a globally collaborative world. This is what we're trying to do with learners, is really help them not just memorize facts and be accountable for procedural knowledge. The whole world is waiting for them to not only be able to absorb information and recall procedures, but to conceptually apply them across different contexts. So in short, technology must be like oxygen, ubiquitous, necessary, and visible. And research says that close to 75% of Americans use the internet as part of their daily jobs and careers. So Mockingbird has created 5 digital literacy frames. And when we say frames, these are really kind of related to learner roles. So what are 5 ways that learners can consistently and collectively use technology or use be digitally literate to perform 5 really critical learning tasks. The first thing we're going to talk about today is helping learners be really good digital decoders. What does that mean to be a digital decoder, and how does that impact our learners, our vulnerable learners? How do we use technology and how do we use our digital literacy skills to be meaning makers? So not only can I decode the information I'm finding in a technology system, but also how do I make meaning from that? And how do I understand how it all works together? The next role is actually being a user of the technology, and then analyzing what I'm using to know that it is valid or it is relevant or it is a good source. And then finally, and I think it's argued that this is probably one of the biggest ones, especially if you work with a younger adult learner, that presentation of persona. How I present myself online matters, because there's this thing called digital footprint, and people will come and find me later for things I might have posted as a young person. And so how do we really manage and present our persona online in a way that is responsible and leads us towards a career pathway of success and moving forward? So let's do this really quickly in our chat box. So I know I haven't gone into depth over these, but let's just use the andragogy skill of discovery. So decoding. Decoding means to break something down or to know how to digest the parts of it. Meaning making, using, analyzing, presentation of persona. I'd love to hear some feedback. Where do we see some of these concerns popping up for our learner population? Where do you think, if you had to choose one, what would be the biggest need? Do they need most help in decoding? Do they need most help in analyzing best sources? Just if you would chat with us, what are some reflections? Presentation of persona, I saw that one come up. Analyzing all the information out there and not just jumping to the first source. Yes, that's a big one. What are some other things that we're seeing, struggles that we see our learners having? Analyzing sources, yeah. Yeah, thank you. People are pumping in, yeah, transfer and application. So how do I absorb and then transfer to other things? Absolutely. Making meaning and understanding other points of view. Yeah, those are huge critical thinking skills, right? Being able to look at multiple perspectives and multiple points of view. Those are really great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to walk us through a little bit about these frames. So these are what the frames look like. Mockingbird has a whole other part of our curriculum that talks about why they need to be visual and how visual tags help us remember. But that first one with the glasses, that's really decoding. How do we break things down, and how do we actually look at the technology for what it is and know how to navigate it? How do we make meaning from things? How do we use technology? How do we analyze what we're using? And then how do we present ourselves from persona? That's the what. So at the end of this workshop, that's what I'll come back and do is really share with us some depth on the what, and then we'll use some examples of how to infuse each of these whats into our daily teaching. But before we do that, I want to share with us something called Infusion. Infusion is really this. It's more about the how. So Infusion requires 2 things. The first thing it requires is that we have to intentionally teach a skill itself. So whatever the skill is, I have to intentionally teach that skill. And that skill that we're talking about in Infusion is normally a skill that's what Mockingbird calls invisible. It's something that we sort of assume that learners know how to do. It's something that we take and we make explicit. We take it and we create something that is out loud and visible and in your face, and we'll teach that explicitly to the learner itself, themselves. And then we intentionally design opportunities to practice and promote the use of that skill. And Infusion is really doing both of those things at the same time. So instead of just teaching a skill, or instead of just practicing a skill, we're going to teach the skill and then also practice and promote the skill. Let's look at this a little more closely. So here's this image here. The image is broken down. Infusion has 3 stages. The first stage is really explicitly teaching an invisible skill. So I'm going to take a skill that potentially is something that is assumed, or something the learner might not have access to, or something we think the learner might have access to. I'm going to teach that skill. I'm going to teach them what the skill is, and I'm also going to provide opportunities for learners to metacognitively think about how that skill would help them. So I'm always going to, in every stage, say, okay, so here's the skill, here's what it is, now how did that work for me? What and how, always. So here's the skill itself. Let's make that out loud and invisible so you understand what it is, and then we'll also think about how that works for me. The second stage is after we have explicitly taught the invisible skill, we're going to work on something called practice and promotion. So we'll provide, as an educator, I'll provide opportunity for us to practice the skill itself, but we'll also practice thinking about and promoting how that's going to help me. I'm constantly embedding and infusing the why. This is how it's helping me. This is how it's working through. And then the third stage is reflection and questioning. So taking the skill that I'm teaching and then helping my learners reflect and question and really think metacognitively about how that skill helped me find the right answer or helped me accomplish the task that I was doing. I know this is a little abstract. We'll dig down into some concrete examples so they make a little more sense. This is the process of Infusion. So let's look at 3 educators. We'll look at Infusion Irene, we'll look at Missed the Boat Mark, and then we'll look at Almost Amy. We'll look at these 3 different educators. We'll look at how they have tried or not tried to infuse some digital literacy frames into their teaching. Let's start by looking at Infusion Irene. So Infusion Irene wanted to teach a lesson on renewable energy. That was her content. That was what she was really trying to teach. But she also wanted to infuse that lesson with 2 digital literacy frames. The first one was presentation of persona. So helping learners understand that before they present anything online, they have to think about how they're going to manage their reputation and manage their interactions with others. And then the other thing she wanted to teach from a digital literacy perspective was analyzing. So how do we analyze sources to know that I'm picking the best sources and I'm not just using someone's blog post or maybe a comment on Facebook or Twitter. I'm using something that's a little more relevant and likely. So the main content is a lesson on renewable energy sources, and then the skills that she wants to infuse in that lesson are presentation of persona and analyzing. So let's look at how Infusion Irene does this. Infusion Irene, she teaches first, before she ever even gets into renewable energy, she teaches the invisible skills of analyzing and presentation of persona. So she looks at analyzing, she teaches what it is, she teaches how that's used, and she teaches why learners need it, why we need to analyze sources. And she does the same thing for presentation of persona. Here's what that is, here's how we do it, and then here's why it's important. So we're looking really, really closely at this invisible skill that a lot of times we take for granted, or we think learners understand what, oh, that's really important that you analyze something before you just cite it, or it's really important that you think about how you say something before you just say it. Those are skills that a lot of educators, especially if you come from a background of being a digital native yourself, and we're reaching that point where more educators who are emerging into our workforce are digital natives, we sort of assume that our learners have these skills. So instead of making those assumptions, Infusion Irene has taught those things. She's taught what they are, she's taught how to use them, and then she's taught a lot about the why and how that works. The why is really important in andragogy, or the study of adult learning. We know that adult learners need rationale, they need purpose, and they need relevancy to stay motivated during learning activities. So if we're not sharing why things are important with our learners, or why we're asking them to do the things that we're asking them to do, learners will disengage. They will and they will not stay motivated. They won't stay with us for the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes until the lesson is over. So here's what Infusion Irene does with her lesson. So she taught them literally, here's what it's like to analyze. Here's what we have to do when we're analyzing digital sources. The second thing she teaches is persona, presentation of persona. Here are the things that are important about presenting ourselves online. So she's already taught that. And now she's going into looking at renewable energy. So she assigns learner groups different types or different sources of renewable energy to research. She takes them to a computer lab, gives them time and space to research a very specific type of or source of renewable energy. And so then learners do that. They go about their business, sorting, researching these sources, and they also evaluate the credibility of the sources they find. Then Irene created an Emoto space where learners describe the energy source they're researching and they share their impacts on the environment. They also comment on each other's research before providing feedback. And they do that before they present something in person. So they've researched, they found a source, they've contributed to an online learning community where we're posting comments and ideas. And then we're going to present the idea in person to do like a short group presentation for the class in person. Then after all of that is over, they discuss how the use of analysis helps better understanding of choosing reliable sources. So they literally say, how did you use the skill of analysis to help you choose the best source? And they also talked about, well, when you contributed to those Edmodo comments, how did you think about presenting your persona and how did you use that to have the best interactions? This was the lesson that Irene created for her learners. So in thinking about Infusion, how did Irene help learners practice the skill of analysis? And how did Irene help her learners practice the skill of presentation of persona? So this isn't about reflecting on it. This is that second part. How did she actually help them practice these skills by infusing them into her other lesson on renewable energy? Let's use our chat box, if you would please. Let's just type some responses to that. So how and what Irene did, how did she help her learners practice both the skill of analysis and also the presentation of persona? I'll pop this screen back up so you can sort of see and have some access there. Waiting on a few people. This is a big question. That's okay. But please, in your chat box, just how did Irene help her learners literally practice using the skill of digital analysis and the skill of digital presentation of persona? Thank you. Yeah, she gave students a safe space to practice by using the lab for research and using e-learning piece for feedback. She had them evaluate the credibility of sources. She used Infusion to make it relevant to students so they would understand two topics at once. Analyzing and practice. Evaluated sources and in Moto Space had to share and present information. Yes. Yep, all of these things are great. So let's see, she framed what the students would be doing. Yes. So even though she had this other topic of needing to teach this renewable energy source lesson, she was able to infuse that lesson with looking at analysis of digital sources by creating an experience for them where they had to look at sources and pull up sources that were meaningful and that were valid. She also had them intentionally create some type of online learning, so that way they had to comment and work and provide feedback on each other's research, so they could actually practice how they present themselves and how they think about their own persona. Had she just mentioned those things in the middle of a lesson without having taught those skills explicitly beforehand, it would be really hard to work on infusing these skills. And then I think the most important part about that is at the end, she had a direct conversation with learners about, ooh, how did using that skill of analysis that we learned about before, how did that help us choose the best sources? In addition to that, how did the way we presented ourselves impact the quality of our interactions with our peers? Because had we said, no, you're wrong and that's a terrible idea, that would have had a very different conversation than the conversations we were able to have online, and then feel comfortable being able to present in person. That's Infusion Irene. She was able to infuse these digital literacy frames into work that she was already doing. It's not an extra thing that she just said, oh, we're going to do a lesson on digital literacy right now. She had taught some skills and then embedded and infused them into the work that she was already doing with learners, which made them more relevant, more valuable, and helped her learners understand how they work. How did Irene help learners think about how they used the skill of analysis? Because that's the last part of Infusion. It can't just be doing it. We have to also know that we've done it. How did Irene help her learners think about how they use the presentation skill of persona? Yeah, people are already going to the chat box. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, reflection, reflection. Yep. She was able to not just have them use the skill, but true infusion helps learners reflect on how that skill helped them achieve a goal. How did that skill help me find the best sources? How did that skill help me present my best self when I was online? Those are really, really critical skills that it's not enough just to teach the skill and use the skill, but then we have to reflect on how that skill supported our work moving forward. That's when we're truly, truly infusing. So that was Infusion Irene. Let's look at Miss the Boat Mark. He had the same lesson. He wanted to teach a lesson also that was on renewable energy and infusing those two frames, or he had a lesson on that. Let's see what he did with his lesson on renewable energy. He had learners read about different renewable energy sources, and he had brought printed articles and handouts to class. In small groups, learners created a presentation about a specific renewable energy source, and they presented their findings to the class. And then they discussed as a group the benefits and drawbacks of each renewable energy source. So they read articles. They, in a small group, compiled the information from the different articles and handouts to create a presentation, and then they presented the findings, and then they had a big group discussion about why each different energy source what were the positives and negatives of each. So let's use our chat box again. I appreciate that. I really appreciate interaction. It gives us a lot more information to work with. So thanks for those of you who are participating. Here's some questions. How did Mark help learners practice the skill of digital analysis? And how did he help his learners practice the skill of digital presentation of persona? Or did he? Yeah, in our chat box, let's see if we can find that. And I am not seeing the chat. There it is. How did he do that? Did he? Students did not get the opportunity to research or select sources themselves. He didn't do those things. Absolutely. He didn't. He taught his lesson on renewable source energy, and the lesson probably went great. It wasn't a poor lesson. He looked at those things, but he wasn't infusing digital literacy skills into his lesson. He just taught the lesson. Doesn't mean that the learners didn't walk away with knowledge about renewable and non-renewable resources. They probably know all about that, but they weren't able to use those skills from a digital perspective. And then, yes, Jennifer, thank you. He didn't frame the skills, and they didn't reflect on how the skills used. And needs to allow for interaction with the material. Those are coming through. Yes, excellent. Thank you. So they were able to use handwritten and those types of things, but they were not able to exercise or practice using digital literacy skills that we know that our learners need. So Mark missed the boat. Let's look also at Almost Amy, because this is really, really critical. Almost Amy, I'm very passionate about Almost Amy because I feel like when I am truly reflective on my own teaching experience, I was a lot like her. I really tried to infuse things into my teaching, and I did some of the time really well. But a lot of times, if I'm seriously honest with how I taught, I didn't know that last reflective piece. So I did a lot of teaching just like Almost Amy. So let's talk about how she did her work. So here's what happens for Almost Amy. She, very much like Infusion Irene, she's going to teach a lesson on renewable energy sources. She's going to infuse those two frames of analysis and presentation of persona. So just like Irene, she assigns learner groups a different source, a different energy source to research. She takes them to a computer lab, gives them time and space to research a type of renewable energy. They research the energy while evaluating the credibility of the sources they find. And then she creates an Edmodo space for them to talk to each other and do all of those things that Irene did, and then they present to the class. That's her lesson. In the chat box, what did Almost Amy forget? Who can help us? Who can help us with that? Looking for some responses there. What was the important part? She taught, so she had taught explicitly what the skill was. Here's the skill. She helped them practice and promote, but what did she forget? Got some people. Without reflection, many students do not really know why they're doing what they're doing. This happened here. Yes, Jennifer's got it. Yeah, so a lot of times what happens often is that learners will do the skill or will infuse the skill in the lesson, but here's what happens is that learners don't have an opportunity to think, oh, How did I use the skill of analysis to help me reach my goal? Analysis is missing. They might have done it, right? Because on that next part, that part where it says learners research renewable energy while evaluating the credibility of the sources they find. Maybe they were doing analysis, but the learners don't know that they were doing analysis. And that's a big difference between just analyzing or being metacognitively aware of the fact that, oh, I am pausing to intentionally evaluate the sources, and my intentional analysis of my sources is helping me achieve this better response. And then it lacked discussion afterwards. So learners didn't really have the conversation about how those skills of presentation of persona or of using analysis, how those really helped them. That's really, really probably, I would say, the thing that I used to forget a lot. I would forget to teach them, hey, these are those 5 skills we're building when we use computers. We would practice those skills and I would have them in my lesson, but I wouldn't literally teach them to my learners explicitly. And then afterwards, because we had practiced and we had done them, I often didn't come back and have them say, oh, these are the things that we did. How did they help us? I would forget that reflection piece. And it's so easy to do because we have like this much stuff to teach and like not much time to teach it in. So infusion, it's really, really important when Mockingbird talks about infusion, what we're saying is that we explicitly teach the invisible skill to our learners. So they're going to know what those 5 frames are and what they represent. In addition to that, we're going to allow time for practice and promotion of those skills embedded in something else. Mockingbird calls that double teaching. And then we're going to help learners reflect on how those skills that we learned about, how those helped us arrive at our answer or get to our learning goal in the end. So that's infusion. Let's do this. I know that learners don't often own information until they have an opportunity to internalize that information and then articulate it using their own words. It's really important, not just to hear things, but to be able to articulate that in our own voice. So let's really quickly, before we move into those 5 frames and me providing some depth on them, let's put infusion in our own words in the chat box. If you would please, let's do that really quickly. When we talk about infusion, what do we mean? Let's just put that in our own words in the chat box. I'm waiting for people to respond. Thank you. What do we mean when we say infusion? Combine, bring together. Beautiful. It's a great synthesis. Connect, bring into everything. Yep. So first we explicitly teach, then we practice, then finally we reflect and discuss it. Yeah, beautiful. I'm seeing some things come in here. Incorporating discovery, analysis, and reflection in a learning system. Analyze, connect it, then discuss it. Infusion is to be intentional in design and delivery of the lessons, remembering to frame and reflection. Beautiful. Thank you for being very thoughtful on that. That's a really important skill for learners to do, and I try to model that all the time with educators. It takes just a few minutes, but before we move on to the next idea, the big idea that we just learned is infusion. I know we can't walk away knowing infusion without putting that in our own words. So let's just take a minute to do that. Super fast way to help learners synthesize before they move forward. So that is infusion, the idea of let's teach the skill explicitly, that invisible skill that the learners are sort of expected to know. Let's teach that skill explicitly. Then let's move forward and practice and promote that skill in everything that we do. And then finally, let's reflect on the skill, and not just how the skill helped me get to the right answer, but also how the skill helped me as a thinker achieve my learning goals. Now let's look at the what. I think we have about 15 minutes left. Let's look at the what. I want to share a little bit more information about these frames and what they really are, because here's, when we look at andragogy and adult learning and what happens with learners who who are in adult education programs, these are things that often are assumed. The world that's waiting for our learners in the workplace assumes learners have these skills, and oftentimes as educators we can assume that learners have these skills too, especially the closer and closer we are ourselves to being a digital native. Sometimes to slow down and stop and think about what these skills are, it's really easy to forget to do that. So I want to spend a little bit of time really breaking these frames down. And I can send these frames out later so you actually have the pictures and the descriptions of them after the webinar is over. So watch for that. I'll send that to Suzanne so she can get it for you. But let's first start with decoding. So decoding is very similar to the same thing that we mean when we say decoding when we read, knowing what the letters mean, knowing what the words mean, knowing what the punctuation means or the different text means. Same thing in the digital world too. So if we look at this, what decoding means is it's familiarity with the structures and conventions of digital media and having confidence in using those frameworks. So to get more specific, digital decoding, literally, when we talk about that, what we mean is, do learners understand things like scrolling or having how many active windows they have up, or being able to use menus and buttons, how to follow links, using mice, swiping, using an avatar, running several programs at the same time simultaneously, and being able to flip back and forth between those things. Digital decoding assumes that learners know how to do these things. It's very challenging to do the other kind of thinking work we have to do when we're struggling just to decode what's going on the screen. It also includes understanding norms and practices for how to participate in online communities and technologies. All of those things, these are really, really important. Being able to work through just knowing how to use ethics and protocols and privacy and sharing, or how to attribute a fact to something else and cite it properly instead of just making it appear like you're the person who came up with it, right? All of those skills are really, really critical. In addition to that, digital decoding also includes things like saving your work, being able to print, being able to organize files, upload files, download files, starting your computer, shutting down your computer, and also, this is really, really important, confidence in trying something new. If you've worked with a learner who is not super confident in like, oh wait, what button do I hit now? Or, oh, am I supposed to hit this button? I don't know how to print. I don't know how to save. I don't know where to put that file. Or I had that file yesterday and I saved it, but I can't find it today, right? We see these struggles with our learners all the time. And the more cloud-based some of our systems get, the more important decoding skills become. It's very easy to think that learners already know how to do all of these things, and research and our experience tells us that more and more learners are struggling with them. And also, I think it's really critical and relevant to say that there's a big difference. I don't know if you can see my video, but between using these skills on a phone and having this type of a skill and having this type of a skill, right? Those aren't the same thing. And so helping learners transfer what they're doing on their phones to a computer is also a really important part of decoding. Decoding includes, this is really funny, when I saw this, I have a story to share, but it understands how colors, how typeface, how font selection, transitions, and animations can impact meaning and messages. I have two really great examples about this. The first one is, for whatever reason, all of my learners, when I was teaching in my youth build program, they always like to use Old English font. Like everything was in Old English font, and it was like, that's not academic font. And so really stopping to explain that the choice of font that we use matters, because it helps us speak in different professional or academic environments. The other thing that is really interesting on a daily life is, just daily use of technology. Is I have a great aunt who just recently found Facebook, and everything she writes on Facebook is like bolded, all caps. And so she has no idea that she's yelling at every single person that she is typing to. But those are the things that we all know because we use that community all the time, and she doesn't know. So I had to tell her, Aunt Jean, when you type in all caps, you're really yelling at everybody. These are things that our learners don't know, and or maybe we shouldn't assume that they know, right? Because assuming access to learners, or assuming our learners have access to this information is just that, it's an assumption. It also digital decoding is also understanding that different modes, so whether I'm using a telephone or I'm texting or I'm using a game or Twitter, they all have different conventions and they all have different characteristics, which means that they're not going to work the same way. And although some of those skills are transferable between the media, we need to make sure that we understand that those aren't always the same. Here's why learners struggle with those things, is that a significant majority of adults say that they need assistance when it comes to using new digital devices. And andragogy assumes adult learners have access, so assumes that they have both access to technology and they also have schema for digital decoding. And this is especially true as more and more courses for adult learners are being taught by digital natives and their learners are not digital natives. Lack of practice and discussion about digital decoding can result in limited abilities in this area. And this is compounded as technologies and modalities are always changing, right? Like every time we turn around, there's a new technology or there's a new program to learn from. So knowing and in making these decoding skills visible so learners can say, oh, I know this is just like when I used that other program over there. They'll start to adopt more and more of these decoding skills. And then just like in reading, we won't have to talk about them anymore. But learners have to be explicitly taught how to develop and transfer these decoding skills. So digital decoding is having familiarity with the structures and conventions of digital media and having confidence in using these frameworks. Let's talk about how we could infuse digital decoding. I'll give this as an example really quickly so we can tie that back to Infusion. But if we look at this model, first thing I have to do if I want to infuse digital decoding is I have to teach these decoding skills to my learners explicitly. Then I have to provide opportunity for them to practice decoding skills and promote the use of decoding skills in my teaching, and then reflect on how decoding skills helped us navigate what it was that we were trying to learn. So if I was going to teach decoding explicitly, that would sound something like, so in order for us to work through and look at an assignment, what we really need to do is we need to decode, which means that we need to know how all the menus and all the things on this website we're about to use work together and what those tools help us. So help us accomplish on the page. So before we get going in the assignment, let's first look at the tools and the features that are available to us on this web page we're about to use. Once we understand how the website works, I'll give us our assignment. There's 5 features on the web page that I can help with a partner. Let's see if we can determine what they are, and then have learners work together to see if they can find the web page tools and resources that are there. But before we dive in, they know and understand very clearly what all those tools are. They're also using decoding skills to work through that. Then I'm going to teach whatever it is that I wanted to teach using the web page, but I'll use those features of the web page to complete the assignment. And then we'll discuss and reflect upon how decoding those skills helped us arrive at our answer or arrive at the goal that we were trying to accomplish. And then we have to think about not just the outcome, but also the process. So we have to ask questions about that help us reflect on how using decoding helped us get to the skill, but also how it helped us practice the skill, but also how it helped us get to the answer. So we have to think about both of those things at the same time. How did I use decoding effectively? What could I have done better with decoding? And then how did the way I used decoding help me get to what I needed to get to? So that was decoding. The next one is meaning making. Meaning making is a reflective process in which learners both interpret and understand text and images using their experiences and knowledge. So not just being able to understand what's there, but then being able to use what's there to make some meaning from it. Meaning making includes being able to follow narrative across elements. So a lot of times in a digital framework or digital media, we'll use graphics and text and tables, and a narrative will flow from one element to the next element. And so our ability to follow that and make connections and link those relationships is really, really critical in a digital forum. So in short, when we talk about meaning making, what we mean is a learner's ability to literally read, relate the information to itself, and then also express information. We assume that learners use cognitive structures such as comparative thinking and symbolic thinking automatically. And our experience and research tells us that learners are not, especially when learners have been part of ABE programs that really rely and lean on teaching procedural knowledge. So if we're using lots of packets or we're using lots of software programs that teach procedural knowledge and not this bigger comparative critical thinking skill, learners don't transfer that online. Learners struggle with this because they lack practice. We have to explicitly teach these comparative skills, and learners assume that, or educators sometimes assume that they have these skills since it's often embedded in instruction. So in Infusion, if I was going to teach meaning making, I would teach literally what meaning making is. We would practice it and promote the use of it in our classroom integrated into something else I'm already teaching, and then we would reflect on it and question how did I use this skill, and then how did this skill literally help me achieve the right answer or achieve where I got. The next one is, let's look at using. So not only do I have to decode and know how to work through the things on the screen, I have to be able to make meaning from them, and then I have to become what we call a user of the technology. Using means it's the ability to deploy digital tools appropriately and effectively for specific tasks, effectively solving problems and issues as they arrive. So I have to be able to use a skill, but when something comes up and I'm in the middle of working through some kind of technology, I also have to not be afraid to try to problem solve instead of, oh, my mouse won't work, I don't know what's wrong, I quit, right? It's this idea of like, I understand how it works long enough to where I'm going to try a couple of things before I give up. Digital using includes the ability to gather and find information, resources, and tools. So to be a user, we have to be comfortable and familiar with tasks like searching for information, being able to filter information, share information with other people, explore, experiment, and innovate. So that when we're talking about using, it's not just turning on and clicking, but it's being a fluid user where I know, oh, I can go look over here, I can use this over here, I can filter my responses a little more clearly, I understand how all these elements work together. Learners struggle with using because they lack practice, first of all. They also lack understanding of transferable digital decoding skills. That lack of understanding, it prohibits experimentation and innovation. When we don't understand how things are transferable from one place to another, we will be able to move. It's hard to move forward, and also that, like it just says there, it prohibits the freedom to explore. I know we're reaching the end of the time. I've got 2 more, so I'm going to go ahead and finish the 2 more, and then if you can hang on with us, that would be fantastic to ask questions. It won't take too much longer, I promise. Same thing with infusing over time. So I'm going to teach the skill of using, we're going to practice using, and then we'll question how our skills are at being a user and how using the technology or the different technologies helped us arrive at our response. The next one is analysis. This is also really complete with being a good critical thinker. Let's see. Being a good critical thinker. So analysis is the ability to make informed judgments and choices in a digital domain, applying critical and ethical perspectives to the consumption and production of digital material. So this is that place where, am I looking at the right sources? Am I really thinking about the sources in a way that's going to help me achieve my goal? How do I work through different perspectives? To dig a little deeper, analyzing includes deconstructing elements that contribute to the meaning and messages in digital communications. It helps us make judgments, helps us draw conclusions about the tools, and it also includes the ability to evaluate, question, choose, recommend, or reject digital content or sources. I would say this is one of the areas in which a lot of our learners struggle, right? Is how do we evaluate? How do we question? How do I pick the right sources? There's so much information out there, and it's really easy to imply like, oh, if anything is good information, and we know that's not true. We know that looking at the comment section of someone's Twitter feed or their Facebook feed is probably not the best place to cite sources, right? But unless we teach these things explicitly, our learners don't know. Learners struggle because, again, it's the same type of critical thinking skills we talked about again before. They lack practice. We have to teach those comparative skills and those critical analysis skills directly and explicitly. And our educators often assume that learners have this skill because it's been embedded in instruction. Same thing. So if I was going to think about analysis skills, we have to explicitly teach what analysis is. We have to practice and promote that, and then reflect and question on how that skill helped me achieve my goal and how I use the skill itself. And last but not least is persona. And I think this is one of the most critical pieces for our learners is this concept of persona. When we talk about persona, what we mean is it's purposeful management of one's own one's own online persona. It's developing a sense of belonging and a confident participant role. Persona includes building a sense of one's own roles within digital environments and sensitivity to how one's interactions impact others. Persona develops awareness of how one's reputation should be developed and managed to support career and employment goals. And finally, a persona refers to an ability to work with others and a variety of digital interactions and exchanges. Learners really struggle with this because management of persona is really about self-monitoring. And we know that research indicates that learners really benefit from self-monitoring skills, and having strong cues for monitoring self increases self-awareness of behavior and additionally facilitates communications between students and educators. So this idea of managing our own persona can become a cue for learners so they can build self-regulation in how they access critical thinking. More research about this. This is really important to our work, especially when we work with gang-involved youth or learners who come from incarceration backgrounds. If we have self-monitoring skills, research says we have less aggression, we have increased on-task behavior and increased listening skills. And we know a lot of times educators lack using technology because we're in a competition for attention. So having self-regulation skills really supports and drives that. Learners lack practice again, that's why they struggle with this. Self-regulation skills are taught indirectly and we need to explicitly teach them, and they're assumed. So if I were going to teach a lesson on infusing to persona, I would teach persona explicitly, and it might look like this. Before we work on our online thing, let's look at this video on our digital footprint. Let's really look at what that is and how we can help manage our persona. So I would work through teaching my learners about digital footprint and managing their own persona first. Then we would go and discuss digital footprint and the importance of managing our digital persona before we post online. Then we would create a post on Edmodo about the debate that we watched on TV, and then we would discuss how considering our digital persona helped us create posts that were more geared towards an effective outcome and didn't damage our reputation long term. Then I would have to reinforce that process of how did I manage my persona explicitly, and then finally, how did managing my persona help me get to a better outcome, which is a better discussion among my peers. So that's really it. Those are our 5 frames. I know those are fast, but I will send those to Suzanne so you have them. If you're interested in more Mockingbird, you can email me. My email is up there on the address, up on the screen. My email address is there, and our webpage is mockingbirdeducation.net. So I'd love to see you there. Thank you, everybody, so much for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. And you have lots of thanks in the chat too. So I hope you get a chance to.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah. So people have really enjoyed it and we'll definitely be sharing it. If anybody has any questions and you have time to stay on, feel free to unmute and ask them or share them in the chat.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much. I'm getting lots of messages coming in. Yay.
Yeah, Shannon, there is a question there. I know that the past webinar you did for us is on our website. Do you also have them on the Mockingbird website?
Yes, so we do have them up on the website. We're going through a little bit of just housekeeping online right now, but you can register online to create an account. And then if you have that account, you can have access to all the old webinars.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have one on active literacy up. We have one on cognitive processing, one on andragogy frames, and that's connected to motivation for adult learners. And we'll put this one up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Donna. Say hi to everyone. So Donna's from my old program. I used to teach with her way back when. So thank you so much, Donna. Please say hello to everybody and give my love to everybody. I miss you guys.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks. Thanks again. And Shannon, yeah, send me any links. It does take a little bit for the video to download to me, and then we get it up on our website. So it'll be tomorrow before I get any emails out. So if you can let me know what links to put in that email, that would be great.
Yeah, that's great. I'll get sort of a PDF together of those frames so people can have them, and then I'll share it with you. So. Okay, awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
You too. Bye, everybody.